today as well. Liz is editor of Property Week, so will give us more of a national perspective as part of the overall conversation. And we're in the very capable hands of Alistair Horton, editor at Business Live, to moderate proceedings for us today. So over to you, Alistair, to pick up the conversation.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, and thanks for everyone for joining us today, and welcome to the webinar with the theme today of the City Region coming out of lockdown and looking at the vision for the future post-pandemic and at the plans for the City Region. I'm Alistair, I'm editor of Business Live, which is Leeds PLC's national regional business news website, and I'm a former business editor of the Liverpool Echo and MIPIM attendee in that capacity. So first of all today, I'd like to introduce Liz. Liz Hampson is editor of Property Week, and she's going to talk to us about how the UK more broadly is reacting to coming out of lockdown, and she's going to give us her thoughts and forecasts on the national scene. Liz.
Thanks very much, Alistair. So I said in one of my first leader comments in lockdown that we will be defined by the way we react to the crisis, and we will be, but unfortunately we'll also be defined by how others react to the crisis, notably central government. And it's the elements that are beyond our control that are making the path ahead so difficult to navigate. Good news is that the lockdown is easing for retail, hospitality and leisure. People can get their lockdown locks locked off at the hairdressers and work off that furlough Merlot wine gut at the gym. They can also eat out at their favourite restaurants and drink once more at their local watering holes if they reopened. What most people are not yet doing, despite Boris Johnson's best efforts, is returning to their workplace, either because their offices have not yet reopened or because they don't feel comfortable enough to. So we're getting back to business, but it is far from business as usual. As the property industry leaders, we asked last month to do a reforecast for the second half of the year test. Unsurprisingly, all that Brexit-related bullishness from the beginning of the year is now a distant memory for most sectors. There are a few outliers that have gone gangbusters during the lockdown and look set for continued growth, notably online retail and the industrial sector, the former very much feeding the latter. But for everyone else, the virus has been pretty devastating. Among the hardest hit sectors, as we all know, are retail and hospitality, and the Chancellor's mini budget didn't offer much respite. A lot of restaurants and bars just haven't reopened, and they're not going to. Many are not viable even under the relaxed social distancing rules. The outlook is slightly better for retail now that the stores are reopening, but this is still a sector in crisis. And as we've been writing in recent weeks, the landlords are starting to be in as much distress as the retailers because they have collected so little rent on the March and June quarter days. And what's worrying, and what a head of investment was describing just yesterday to me as the elephant in the room, is how exposed pension funds are to retail, and local authorities too. As we've reported many times in Property Week, and we'll be looking into again next week, they have continued to invest heavily in retail, often outside their jurisdictions, even when the wheels started to fall off the sector a few years ago. The words that have been bandied about are apocalypse, Armageddon, and in last week's issue, Box Park's Roger Wade warned of bedlam, he said it twice for effect, if the rent issue is not resolved. On the plus side, landlords aren't sitting around waiting for the axe to fall. They're trying to take their destinies into their own hands. Our lead story this week was about the growing number of landlords offering their tenants the option to switch to turnover-based rents to help them through the current crisis. This isn't any empty gesture. Landlords will be sharing the pain rather than any gain with tenants for the foreseeable, but less rent is better than no rent. The consensus is that landlords and retailers need to work together to save our high streets and themselves. And one of the interesting questions we'll be asking next week in the magazine is, what will happen to all that department store space that's hit the market? Also, the question of the role of experiential retail. Most experts think it will be key. And critically, that experience will now need to extend to how clean and safe people feel stores are. Shopping is no longer an idle leisure pursuit. Consumers are on a mission to purchase now. They feel they're taking a risk. From today, they'll be wearing masks. The retailers and landlords who understand this and respect the anxious as well as cater to the impervious will be the winners. And it's a similar scenario with the offices and the nation's return to the workplace. Allied London's Mike Ingle sums it up perfectly when he notes that there has been a seismic shift in the way people view property. They aren't deciding which property they want anymore. They're deciding whether they want property at all. And my gut instinct is that they will, but counterintuitively, they might even want more because social distancing is reversing the densification trend. And that certainly seems to be borne out by the data. Investment volumes tanked in lockdown. They are starting to recover now. There are even green shoots of recovery in the part of the market that people are most concerned about, which is flexible offices. There's reportedly been a significant increase in inquiries and requirements in recent weeks, driven by 3 factors. Corporates wanting flexible space to add to their existing space, startups looking for space, and businesses switching to a regional hub and spoke model. The sector is not out of the woods yet, and some companies will never emerge. But opportunity knocks for the stronger players, and I believe it knocks also for locations such as Liverpool. It's certainly good news for the city's office sector that the Passport Agency and UK Visas and Immigration have now agreed a new 10-year lease. And there are other reasons to be optimistic about the wider property outlook for the city. There's the 25-year lease that Robbie Williams has just signed to open a new campus at the repurposed Metwater Shopping Centre. There's Capital & Centric's Littlewoods Film Studios, Paddington Village, Pall Mall, the Knowledge Quarter, and the new Everton Stadium, if you're not a Liverpool fan. All of these and the city's wider £1.4 billion recovery plan aid to the city's historic cultural strengths and its rapidly emerging new strengths in key growth areas such as life sciences. In short, there are plenty of challenges ahead, but there are also huge opportunities that Liverpool is better placed than most to capitalise on, and that should enable it to emerge from this crisis not just intact, but stronger. So now I'll hand you back to Alistair, who'll kick off the main event, exploring those challenges and opportunities.
Thank you very much indeed, Liz. Clearly, it is a very challenging time, a time of flux, a time of change. But it is, of course, good for us to look forward as well. So thank you for giving us some optimism there at the end. And Liz could be back later on to ask questions later on as well, once we've heard from our other speakers. So thank you very much indeed, Liz. So I'll move on now to our next 2 speakers. We'll be speaking to, first of all, Frank Rogers, who's the Chief Executive of the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, and he's going to talk about the City Region Plan. And then Tony Reeves, Chief Executive of Liverpool City Council, will talk about the Liverpool City Plan. As I mentioned at the start, part of the purpose of this webinar is to talk about the vision for the future and the plans for the city and for the city region. This gives us a bit of a chance to discuss that. Once Frank and Tony have spoken to us, we'll then be taking some questions from some key private sector representatives. And then, as Stefan mentioned at the start, we'll also give people who are listening into the webinar a chance to ask their questions as well. So Frank, if it's all right with you, Frank is a Chief Executive of the Combined Authority. We'll start with Frank, and he's going to talk a bit about the City Region Plan, which has in fact been unveiled today. Frank.
Thanks, Alistair. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, as Stephen and Alistair have both touched on there, we formally launched the City Region's Economic Recovery Plan this morning. It was actually submitted to government on Monday of this week, and there'd been extensive engagement with government in advance of that submission, but we publicly launched it this morning. It's a plan that is city region in its nature, and it's been engaged with all of the 6 local authority areas. It's not a combined authority plan, it's a Liverpool City Region Plan, and I think that's really important that that's recognised. We've titled it Building Back Better, because I agree with Liz, we've got to do everything we can here to take the opportunities that the horrible situation that we've all gone through over the course of the last 5 months has generated for us and do what we can to come back better. We're looking for this to create a globally competitive, environmentally responsible and socially inclusive Liverpool City Region. So I've touched on it being produced in conjunction with a number of key stakeholders across the city region. A number of them have signed up to the plan because we want government to understand that this isn't a public sector plan. This isn't a combined authority or an individual local authority plan. This is a city region plan, and it's got the support of the key city region stakeholders in both the public, the private, the voluntary and the academic sector. And so there is very extensive support for the plan, and a significant number of key stakeholders have signed that plan off for us. I think it's really important that we do realise that the Liverpool City Region was in a really good place pre-COVID. We had a lot that we needed to protect, but we had an awful lot more that we were ready to contribute. And we've had a good 10 years in advance of COVID. We've reduced our unemployment rate from well above to actually being below national average levels. The visitor economy sector and the culture sector, fantastic, internationally recognised. Universities, major investors in our economy and our people. The expansion of the port, the development of a fast-growing social economy, nationally recognised strengths in materials science, infectious diseases. We could go on and on and on. And our plan before COVID was to build and expand on those strengths and to tackle head-on some of the long-standing challenges and issues that we've had as a city region, and that have unfortunately held back our city region for too long and not enabled us to maximise potential. We have been hit harder than most in the city region, and I think that enhances the challenge for us, but that's part of the intent behind the plan, looking at delivering a recovery that reduces some of the regional inequalities that we've suffered from a very significant period of time now. So it's been an incredibly challenging few months. I think it's already been highlighted. The economy's changed permanently. We will not go back to where we were. So we produced a plan that's been developed on a detailed evidence base of the impacts of COVID. We started the recovery plan very early on in the response phase to this. We recognised that the city region by itself wasn't going to be able to support and sustain the business economy across our city region. When the impacts were of a level of £1 to £2 billion per month, there was no way that the city region could resolve the challenges alone. And we needed to look at a medium to long-term plan, but with some very significant short-term impacts to enable us to start to revitalise our economy. And a key point was trying to mitigate the impacts in the first place and move forward. And in order to generate maximum benefit, we need to reflect our economy's future shape. So the recovery plan refers to a business ecosystem. It refers to people-focused recovery. It obviously refers to place, and it references a green recovery. So there's 4 strands there, but all underpinned by commitments from all signatories to the plan to look to build back better. And that means build back better in a whole variety of different ways. So we're looking to commit to a step change in how we facilitate business growth. We've put in the document an innovative set of local interventions that we need to implement to deliver effective, targeted support and finance the filling of local gaps in the provision of that support. There is a new generation of ambitious, deliverable economic infrastructure projects that are defined in the document. And for those, we've got strong private sector support because, as I've touched on, this has to be a joint initiative and a collaborative approach. Obviously, we're all aware the pandemic's had significant impact on people's health, their well-being and their livelihoods. We had the largest growth in employment in the country over the last 5 years in our city region. And so the people-focused recovery has to quite rightly look at pressing forward the need to protect our labour markets in the city region. It looks at putting programmes in place that are needed at both a national and a local level to support employability, to tackle some of the skills gaps and to reduce skills shortages. But to be able to do that, we've got to work in close partnership with government, and I'll touch on that a bit more towards the end, in addressing those challenges and in investing now for future fiscal savings. Place has already changed and will continue to change as a result of this. So the place-based recovery programme looks at putting in place sensitive plans to revitalise city centres, town centres and local communities in a post-COVID world. It looks at the culture, the visitor economy, how we can maintain our momentum in housing, the interventions that we need in the cities and the town centres. We feel that we live in the UK's most exciting city region, and we trust our cultural vibrancy to lead us forward out of this. The green component recognises significant changes. I think we've all noticed the air is cleaner, there's less congestion on the highways. There have been benefits that have come out of a horrible 5-month period, and so the Green Recovery Programme is looking to try and retain and capture as many of them as we can. And we think that the Green New Deal is mission critical in this and needs long-term investment to deliver green industries and jobs for the future. One of the immediate local contributions we think can progress in that space is Mersey Tidal Power. It's an ambitious and an innovative project, but that linked into other schemes like housing refit programs and long-term green investment in hydrogen and carbon capture are really important. Financial cost and impact to date cannot leave anyone in any doubt about the scale of the challenge that we face. None of us can address this alone, either as local authorities, combined authorities, central government, or the private sector. So the recovery plan's been developed with that intense engagement I've touched on, and its success depends on us working collaboratively to deliver it together, and critically to deliver it in partnership with government. So each of the programmes and projects within there are looking to respond to our evidence on our economy and what works for public investment. The leaders across the city region are more ambitious about the growth of our region than ever. We can get opportunity out of a crisis, and so the recovery plan will look to use this unfortunate situation that we've all been through to put in place foundations for the change in our economy and to drive us on. We'll look to change the narrative around COVID-19 from one of crisis to one of opportunity and to one of transformation. And with devolved recovery funding, we'll look to support existing businesses to survive in the first instance, then to recover and grow. We'll look to protect the gains that we've made in education, skills and improvement, and to prepare our workforce for future growth industries. Allow our vibrant city centre to lead us to recovery, look at executing town's revival plans and working with the private and community sector to create future places of distinction, and launch 3 major green initiatives, 2 of which have got national importance. We're looking for an investment from government of 1.4 billion, but 1.4 billion that will unlock the 8.8 billion pounds worth of projects that were touched on earlier. And these aren't aspirational projects. These are projects that we can look to start in the next 12 months across our city regions. They've got the potential to create 94,000 jobs, a further 28,000 jobs in construction, and secure employment for 26,000 people who are currently not in work. We'll look to unlock development for 19,000 new homes, retrofit a further 6,500 new homes, and bring forward 562,000 square metres of new commercial and retail floor space, all of which, as I've touched on, will generate more than 8.8 billion of GVA for our city region and our recovery. So yes, it's a challenge, but out of this challenge, we think there is an opportunity. And as a city region working in partnership, we're going to do all we can to look to maximise on that opportunity for the residents and the people of our city region. Thanks, Alistair.
Thanks very much indeed, Frank, for that. As I mentioned earlier on, Frank and Tony, our next speaker, will be up for questions shortly. I'll bring in, if I may now, Tony. So we've heard about the broader city region perspective. And Tony Reeves now, who's Chief Executive, of course, of Liverpool City Council, is going to talk to us more now about Liverpool City Council's own plan and response to the situation. Tony.
Okay, thanks, Alistair. I think the first thing to say is that the 2 plans are not distinct. They're actually very much aligned. We recognise that the city plan was jointly submitted by the City Mayor and the Metro Mayor. As with the City Region plan, extensive private sector and other partner engagement with a lot of support from across the city and the city region for the plan we were putting forward. But we looked right at the start of the crisis. We started work on our economic recovery plan at the end of the first week of lockdown, when we were in the midst of dealing with the crisis, but we recognised then that this was likely to lead to a really big shock to the economy and potential long-term economic scarring. It's really, really important that we were coming out of the traps quickly as a city. So we coined the project Operation Greyhound to do just that. And we recognised that from experience from previous recessions, probably showing my age, unfortunately, that those places that can be fleet of foot and can get out in front can genuinely use a crisis to reposition their places relative to other places. And certainly in the last recession, I was chief executive of Bradford, and a number of big commercial schemes we got going during the recession, when we were prepared to take some risks, enable that city to move forward at a pace that it hadn't done for a long time previously. And we brought that thinking into what we were doing here. In terms of how it fits with the wider city region plan, we recognise, and Frank does as well, because we worked together on this, as did our teams, that the city, with that concentration of knowledge-based assets, is really where the economic recovery will start from. And previous recessions have taught us that. Doesn't mean it's all about the city, it's about the wider city region overall, but there's a specific set of things that we could do in the city, and that's why we developed quickly a city recovery plan. The two plans are really well aligned. Both teams on the city region side and the city council side, together with our advisors and our partners, have worked together to get that alignment right. And I think you can see the place-based plan for the city in the context of the wider city region plan if you read the two of them side by side. And so, you know, Frank and I were joking before we came on, we were going to pretend that we didn't know about each other's plans, but we thought that would be a bit cruel, to be honest. We've worked really closely on that. Ours focuses on four things. It focuses on innovation, focuses on housing, focuses on employment, and it focuses on the visitor and hospitality sectors. And in terms of innovation, there's a really big spatial focus on the Knowledge Quarter, but also the Central Business District with things like the Pall Mall scheme, a range of other projects. But we recognise that the progress we've made in the Knowledge Quarter over the last 4 or 5 years, which is, you know, from zero to what's increasingly becoming a globally recognised innovation district, that we need to build on that. And actually innovation and particularly around health and life sciences and some real strength around infectious disease were really sort of pertinent issues in terms of recovery from this crisis. There's a lot of political focus as well as economic focus on those. We're really keen to make sure that we capture that triple helix of commercial, academia and public sector coming together to really drive growth, and not just research for research place, but applied research that leads to solutions that we can commercialise and generate business growth and jobs, which obviously are at the heart of what we're doing. And there's a number of shovel-ready projects. Liz referred to one of them earlier in terms of the Littlewoods Film Studio. And by working together with our city region colleagues, we've already secured the first tranche of funding from government to get some of these shovel-ready projects moving forward, and you will see activity on site this year. And that was the focus on the projects we put in there. We've got a range of other projects that we want to follow behind this. So this isn't the economic strategy for the long term for the city. This is about the first step in really getting moving over the next few months. And the next phase of buildings on Paddington Village, a lot of you will know about already, really successful with the Spine, which is nearing completion, the Kaplan International School, the Rutherford Cancer Centre, all built and functioning. Other projects in the pipeline, and certainly the next commercial building we expect to see on site this year. Upper Central, that whole area from the universities down to the Littlewoods building, the Adelphi Hotel and Lime Street Station, including Mount Pleasant Car Park, that's a whole area that will add to the Knowledge Quarter, the potential for 2.5 million square feet of development and several thousand knowledge-intensive jobs over the coming years. It's our ambition to be on site end of this year, beginning of next year, with the first phase of that project. We're working really hard with Liverpool John Moore University and other partners to get that moving. So there is a real determination to get these big commercial projects coming out of the ground this year and signalling not just that Liverpool's open for business, but Liverpool has really investable propositions and the ambition and the partnership working to really drive forward with these schemes. In terms of housing, I won't say too much about this because Frank's already touched on it. Again, we work with City Region colleagues on this. A really significant retrofit programme in the housing, in the city for housing. We recognise, and this is important from an employment point of view, it's important from a housing improvement point of view, it's important from a carbon reduction point of view, because 40% of the emissions in the city come from the existing housing stock because of the old poor quality nature of a lot of our housing stock. And so we were looking to get 3 wins with a particular programme, and actually that's been replicated in the City Region plan across the City Region. In terms of employment, we, all the way through the plan, we engaged really closely with government departments, and we're continuing to do that. And we think we played a role in the employment packages the Chancellor announced a few weeks ago. We were pushing very hard for a future jobs fund type scheme, which we recognise, whilst really expensive, is a very good way to keep people in work and to get people back into work. And what we were saying to the Treasury and to Bays and others is that even the most costly schemes have a positive impact on the Exchequer and have a positive impact on the local economy if they're properly structured. And we have the benefit of colleagues at the City Region, at the Combined Authority, that led the Future Jobs Fund very successfully in Merseyside 10 years ago. And our ability to take that for that credibility, I think, has really helped shape some of the national thinking on that. And it's also a product of us engaging so early with government in this process. Perhaps in other places, we're just focused on the response to the crisis. And just to put this into context, it isn't going to take much with the unwinding of furlough for us to get back to 1980 levels of unemployment. And we're absolutely determined that we are not, like the 1980s, going to lose a whole generation of young people. They're critical to our economic future and the future of our towns and cities in the City Region. And there's a collective determination to do everything we can not to do that. And one stat that really brought home the importance of this for me is if people are out of work for more than 2 years, they are more likely to die than they are to work again. And that is a verifiable statistic in the UK, and it is really, really important that we really do hit the ground running with these employment schemes. And Frank and I have been invited with our teams to work with DWP colleagues to make sure that the scheme for the City Region works within the national framework, but is tailored to the context of our economy. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, and because of that engagement from both the Combined Authority and the Council early doors, we've got the opportunity to shape that in the local context. And believe me, we will be taking up the offer to do that with colleagues in DWP and other parts of government. And then the final bit that I want to touch on is the work we've been doing in the hospitality sector. Liz started off with this, and I think everybody recognised how hard it's been hit, as well as retailing. We worked really hard with our retailers of Liverpool, one and others, to make sure the reopening was successful and people could feel confident and safe in coming into the city to start shopping again. And it's not what it was pre-crisis at the moment. It's picking up steadily, but some of the numbers for some of the national stores in Liverpool have demonstrated that Liverpool is doing really well. And I won't go into detail because I haven't got permission from those companies, but there's a lot of good news that we are doing well relative to other places, and we want to continue to do that. In terms of hospitality, we recognise that businesses that had had no income for 3 or 4 months, with still a load of fixed costs, potentially making use of government loans, which are useful, but are creating escalating debt situations for them. And then the situation of social distancing, meaning they couldn't replace the revenue streams they had previously, was creating a real perfect storm for a lot of businesses. So throughout the crisis, we've had weekly calls with the Hospitality Association, other members of the Visitor economy, hoteliers, restaurateurs, etc., and business support groups. And we've listened really carefully. On the back of what they were telling us, we argued very strongly to government in a lead role I played for the North West, with a load of evidence and case studies that we put forward for a discretionary business grant scheme on top of the business grant scheme that came forward, because there were quite a lot of businesses that were missing out because the parameters were a bit too tight. And I think we played a material role in shaping government's thinking on that. And quite frankly, we saved a lot of businesses in our city region that would have gone to the wall if we hadn't been able to do that. But that scheme was obviously rolled out nationally, and I think that was some really strong leadership in our city region tackling those issues. But what we've also done is started to look at the problem from different angles, and we've worked collectively with the industry. We came up with this concept of Liverpool without walls, where by closing streets such as Castle Street, Bowell Street, Lark Lane, and hopefully some others moving forwards, and with some really well-designed outdoor seating areas, not doing it in a cheap and cheerful way, with covers in poor weather, etc., we could bring the restaurants out into the street so we could maximise the number of covers, create a great atmosphere for people in what is, let's face it, an absolutely beautiful city with great buildings, and really help with the revenue stream into those businesses. The response from the restaurants and other parts of the hospitality sector have been absolutely overwhelming. Really, really strong partnership working between the public and private sector. And we're now starting to talk about themed events, how we can bring the other parts of the culture sector, theatres, etc., into street animation, etc., to make it really, really special in terms of that whole experience of coming into Liverpool to enjoy an evening. Safe, but really interesting and really special. And I guess where we're heading with this, there's a real debate now raging here. It's a positive debate. Is this a temporary measure during the crisis, or actually is there an opportunity to reimagine the role the city centre plays, differentiated from other places, and think much more like European cafe-style culture in our city centre? We've certainly got the cityscape for it, the public spaces, the great buildings, and we think the mood of the city is very much shifting in that direction. And so you may well see a lot more of this coming. And certainly the businesses are pushing us to say, look, come on, let's co-invest and make this really special going forwards. So now we've had a really good response from government. Already funding has started flowing our way. I think we've demonstrated that government do listen if you put evidence forward in a considered way, backed by businesses. And just as an example, Frank and I are on a conference call with Treasury this afternoon, talking about both the city region plan and the city plan, and the things that we can do to take things forward at pace to make sure our contribution to UK PLC is both recognised and optimised as we go forward. I'll pause here, Alistair, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much indeed, Tony. Thanks also to Frank earlier on. So we're going to start taking questions now. I'm going to start with some questions from private sector representatives who are already signed up. And Stefan, I think, is going to put them on the screen for me. We're going to speak in no particular order to Barry Roberts of Morgan Sindall, Steve Parry of Ion, Anne King from Stephen Hunt Associates, and Sean Keys from Sutcliffe. And I think I'm right in saying that our first question is going to come from Barry Roberts. I can see Barry's name. Barry is appearing on screen now. Barry, are you going to join us and give us our first question? Just need to unmute yourself, Barry, but hello.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for that update. Really, some really great positive messages there, and some kind of realism from Liz earlier as well. I suppose a bit of context to my question before I ask it is, obviously I run a construction company. We, during lockdown, were affected quite badly at first, but we kept our jobs going. And thankfully, most of our sites now are up to kind of 100% of the resources back on the site. Everything's, made everything safe as best we can for everybody, engaged with the supply chain, got everybody back up and running, which is great. But offices are a little bit different, aren't they? So I run the northwest of Morgan Sindall. So we've got an office in Liverpool, we've got an office in Salford Quays, and I kind of split myself between them two places. I'm in Salford Quays today, and and it's all pretty quiet. You know, Liverpool, I was in Liverpool during the week, and again, that's really, really quiet. I guess lots of private sector and public sector companies have learned a lot of messages during this experience in terms of efficient working and working from home and less travel and saving money on kind of inefficient things, which has been great. And I think some of them behaviours will stay with us. But one of the kind of key problems that causes is that nobody's spending any money, are they? So when I'm working from home, having beans on toast for me lunch and for 99p, well, I'm not really affecting the local economy very well. So I have been a bit surprised actually at how quiet. I thought over recent weeks it might start getting a bit busier, but I personally just can't see it, and I'm worried about it. And there's another rub that obviously people working from home, they're missing out on that kind of interaction with their colleagues, you know, spontaneous conversations, coming up with great ideas and all that kind of stuff. So I'm actually encouraging my people to come back to the office now, because we've made them safe. We need people back, and we need people kind of generating the economy again, you know, buying fuel, buying sandwiches, and kind of just getting the whole place moving again. So that's kind of my message at Morgan Sindall. So I suppose my question is there something the local authority or the leaders can do in terms of getting that message out to all the private sector companies to let's all take our responsibility and get this place moving again, really?
Yeah, I'll start with you, Tony, if I may, because I know we were talking about this one earlier on.
Look, I think this is a great question, but it's a hugely important issue. And I think first thing councils can do is to lead by example. We, in the first week of the crisis, we had to transition 4,500 people into home working in a week. And we managed to do that, much to our surprise, I have to say, because we'd never faced a task like that in terms of a digital solution. But we're progressively bringing our staff back in. We've worked really closely with the trade unions, and we've redesigned the workspaces. We've got protocols in place, and we've done a lot of communication with the staff. I think it's really important not to just say, right, from this day you're all coming in. We have to have willing colleagues coming in, and we need to work with people and understand the very real concerns that staff will have in that, and make sure we're addressing those properly and very transparently, and that we are able to flex the model in the light of experience as we bring people in, and not just stick rigidly to the plans that we put in place. And I think we've worked really hard on that. So from the 1st of July, we brought 10% of the staff back in to the workplaces across the City Council and the city centre. It's another 10% from the 1st of August, and the aim is from the 1st of September up to 50%. And in terms of maintaining 2 metre social distancing, that's where we think we're likely to be until there's a more permanent solution to the crisis, where we can then flex that more. We have, without doubt, learned lessons, and what this crisis will do is it will accelerate the journey towards agile working that we were already on. But we still fully recognise that work is both a place and an activity for a lot of people. That point about social interaction that Barry made was important. I think long-term productivity, getting that blend between agile working and coming into the office is still really important. And what I think is very, very important, and I've raised this in my role as chair of the Merseyside Recovery Group with Frank and other colleagues in the City Region this week, is that we need to be talking to the big employers in the city and asking them to look through a range of different lenses, not just about their own organisation, but about our, what is in our collective interest to make sure the whole economy is functioning. Yeah. By bringing people back in, we can contribute to the recovery of the city and town centre economy across the city region. And I think this is really, really important that we do this. And we'll be engaging with businesses in the coming weeks, certainly in advance of September, to try to encourage a lot more people to come back into our urban centres, but to do that very safely.
Thank you.
And Frank.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. I won't repeat what Tony said, but we'll follow broadly the same approach. I think key within this, Barry, is confidence of members of the public, confidence of our staff. I think there's been a few issues that have impacted on that, where perhaps the clarity and consistency of message hasn't been what it could have been, and then that impacts on people's confidence. transport is a key issue in that there was advice that came out from government: don't use public transport or avoid public transport. We tried to nuance that locally and say, use it where you have to, because a message of not using public transport isn't great, doesn't demonstrate confidence. But we've kept the transport network going throughout the pandemic. It's ramped up now, it's able to accommodate more, and we want more people to use it and use it in a safe way. Balance is critical in all of this. We've got to make sure we get the right balance of getting the economy back to where it needs to be, but retaining the confidence of our staff, confidence of members of the general public, whilst critically ensuring we don't get into a space where we end up with a second spike. And it's making sure that we manage that balance, and it will change on an ongoing basis, but we need to be able to respond quickly to it, because getting the economy moving again is hugely important for us.
Yeah.
Very valid point.
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks, Barry, for your question there. I think our next question is going to come from Steve Parry of ION. Steve, you will all know from ION, one of the best known development companies in the region. Steve, hello.
Good morning, everyone. Morning, everyone. Interestingly, Barry, as usual, has stolen my question, so I'll have to think of another one. I mean, it's interesting. We've started to come back in the office because almost as a sort of moral statement in that we're phasing it between half the office in one day and alternate days, etc. So I think it is quite important, because actually the city centre and most city centre are extremely quiet. On a broader basis, I think one of the interesting thing about taking stock about where we are at the moment is that what we've actually seen in the property market is almost, in certain sectors of the property market anyway, as an acceleration of change that was happening anyway. And that goes right to the root of how the property market works in terms of funding in particular. Because obviously, as Liz had said earlier on, that the landlords are now suffering as much as the retailers. And actually the structures of transactions, because the idea of the institutional investor lease form is probably completely out the window now for it's gone almost in terms of, and obviously we were seeing a trend previously of involvement, more active involvement of landlords in businesses. So almost a sort of, a profit sharing and turnover rent type model coming forward generally. In terms of the context of Liverpool, we got to the stage that before the coronavirus, that actually things were going quite well, and we were sort of looking at speculative offices, etc. And certainly we were, and other sort of projects that were starting to be fundable in Liverpool. We've always, for a long period, we've had issues about viability, and we're just getting to the stage where we're getting to viability that would work. I think the issue that we've got now is that's going to take a massive knockback, and from the private sector development point of view is actually we need a mechanism that enables us to take developments forward in terms of viability. And I think actually what's really encouraging about what's been said by both Tony and Frank today is actually that we need to reset the bar in Liverpool, and actually that we need to actually really become a green and socially inclusive city, and actually promote that as being our USP. Because for all the regeneration that's happened in the city over the years, we've always had an issue with many people in the outer reaches of the city not benefiting from that properly. So actually the green aspect is probably one way of doing that. So just in terms of questions, I suppose, is that the thoughts in terms of how support or how the private and public sector can work together to actually make things viable. And that's not just, saying, can we have a grant, please? Is there other mechanisms about that? But the other challenge I think that the city has got, which has been debated a fair while, and this is the city region generally, but the city is equally included in this, is actually the supply of land. So, you can drive around the city or the city region, see lots of patches of land. We've got two issues which are really relevant or prevalent here. One is the condition of that land in terms of future development and the remediation and infrastructure that's required, which is often, sort of hugely expensive, and it's actually sometimes more expensive than the land value. And the second aspect to it is the fact that we've got lots of land that has been acquired by people over the years that have actually been locked up. In other words, speculators have actually own lots of sites in the city region who've got no intent of actually disposing of those and have unrealistic expectations on land value. So I'd be interested to, from both Frank and Tony, to have comments on that broader things. A, how to make things viable, and B, how do we release sites? Because actually one thing that the city region is quite constrained on is land supply, particularly around Liverpool and around the Mersey areas, and without going out to St Helens, etc. We haven't got a huge amount of land, so we need to make the best of what we've got and reuse the land we've got, the brownfield stuff, etc. So that's basically what I'd like to bring out, please.
Thanks very much. Land. Frank, shall I start with you on Steve's question there?
Thanks, Alistair. Steve, I don't know whether you're aware, but we have been successful in securing 45 million in brownfield land remediation fund from central government. Again, it's something we've been working on a while, that they were talking about potentially going to competitive bids for that. We lobbied against that and made it clear to them that we had a whole series of sites that were available. As a consequence of that, we were able to secure that 45 million on a direct allocation. The work's already started with Tony and the other local authority chief execs and their growth directors. How do we get that spent quickly and get projects moving quickly? Because our ability to secure more is going to be directly linked to our ability to secure what's already been provided. And there is a competitive element that we're currently putting a submission into. And there is a resource component that we've also just secured on brownfield development. So looking to release land sites or make land sites available for development is something that we put some initial focus on. I'll leave Tony to pick up the planning issues and the challenges of currently underdeveloped areas. But one of the other key things I think it's important for the property community to understand, we've also tasked the team at looking at the assurance framework process and the grant funding agreement process, and look at almost developing light versions of them, because we need to be able to be more agile and to be able to respond faster and get things moving quicker. So things are happening along the lines that you're suggesting. We're also in extensive government discussions in respect of what they're now calling the SHILF. They've put an L in there for land as a component in the Single Housing Infrastructure Fund. And again, we're targeting hundreds of millions of pounds for the city region within that context. So there's a lot of work going on. Brownfield is critical for us, and we've got the Brownfield Register, and we're able to now start looking at releasing those sites. So I think it's heading in the right direction, but we need to work collaboratively, not just at a city region level, critically with Homes England, with MHCLG and national government, to make sure we can evidence that we can utilise available funding and generate outcomes from it quickly.
Frank, can I just ask a supplemental then? Is that fund, that brownfield fund, available for commercial developments as well as residential?
It's available to the combined authority at the moment. We're still trying to get full details of the rules wrapped around it, Steve. Government announced the money, and then they give you the rules for the deployment of the money a little bit later on. So we're still trying to look at that. But critically, what we have got to do is get projects moving. Yeah. And so I won't name individual projects, but I know there is one that you're aware of and Tony's aware of, that we want to try and utilise that fund to get moving quickly with.
Tony, I'll bring you in now on the subject of land use as well.
Yeah, there's two bits to what Steve was asking in terms of getting the collaboration right between the public and private sectors to restore investor confidence and to get schemes moving. But understandably, investor confidence has been knocked, and we're not going to see a load of spec building in the city in the short term. But I think by working collaboratively, we can address those issues. And things like the deal that we did between the Council of two universities with Bruntwood SciTech during the crisis, where they bought a 25% stake in Liverpool Science Park, with an ambition to grow that stake by investing really heavily in the Knowledge Quarter, is an opportunity to build those strategic alliances where you can take a long-term view with institutional funder there for the long term, backing the venture, and by sharing risk and by working together, I think we can overcome those sorts of barriers. And really clear as well is that the public sector has to have some skin in the game, has to take its share of risk, but can't de-risk projects in their entirety. If that was the case, we might as well be the developer, quite frankly, and that isn't the best role for the public sector, other than in certain circumstances. When it comes to land, I think we have the key thing is having the right land in the right areas and it being ready for development. So, the brownfield land grants that Frank has just talked about are going to be really important in preparing sites for development. When you look at, if you take two big sites on the outer reaches of the city, like Festival Gardens and Stonebridge Cross, significant land with plans at different stages to take forward mass development of those areas, which is really, really important. Then within the city, I've talked about the Knowledge Port, we've got Liverpool Waters, Pall Mall scheme we're hoping the first phase of that will be on site this year, with further phases to come. If you take Upper Central, in the past, I guess the council wouldn't have been as strategic as we're being now. And looking at that whole site, and whilst we want to get the first phase of that moving this year, we also recognise to optimise the potential of the whole site and making sure that really does play a strategic role in the future of the city, we will need to use our land assembly powers. We'll be taking a report into our cabinet later on this year to do just that. We've established a planning policy that we need through the SRF that's been created there to be able to do that. And what you will see is the council being more proactive, working with partners and prepared to use our land assembly powers to make sure that we have the right sites in the right areas, and we're using that land in a strategic way to pursue the objectives in our plan, rather than just getting development at any cost on those sites. So I think that doesn't mean strategic, i.e. we're not going to do anything for 5 years. It means being really clear of our purpose, focusing on our strengths in terms of how we build the economy and the role that property plays in enabling that to happen, but with a line of sight running through, or a golden thread running through all of our activity to achieve those objectives. And I think you'll see a lot of action in that regard over the coming few months.
Thanks, Tony. Time is very tight, so I'm going to take a couple of quick fire questions, if I may. I think Stefan's going to bring in Anne King of Stephen Hunt and Sean Keys of Sutcliffe. While they're coming on, I'll just mention a couple of topics that have been raised by some of the people attending the webinar. The importance of transport. Someone has stressed, and the fact that it's not practical for businesses to have everyone coming back in their cars immediately, so that's someone seconding Frank's point about public transport. We've also had somebody stressing the importance of social enterprise in the city region as well, which is something else that has been mentioned. We will carry on for a few more minutes, I think, just to make sure that we get enough time to answer the questions we've got to come. So if I start then with Anne, if Anne's on, Anne, your question for our panelists today.
Yeah, good morning. Not sure if you can see me or hear me.
I can hear you.
Right, okay. Good morning or good afternoon, as it is. Tony, I think you've already touched on what my question was based around, and it's in respect of these shovel-ready projects that you've mentioned. So from the list that I've seen in various publications and whatnot, a lot of these projects have been kicking around for some time now, and I would say a lot of them actually already have developers, consultants and contractors already attached to them. So my question is will there be any more additional funding that's going to be thrown into the pot to create any sort of further stimulation to the construction industry?
Frank, I think Tony?
Yeah, okay, look, yes, some of these projects do have developers, but if you take Upper Central, for example, this is a new strategic area for the city that we're looking to take forward. We have to procure developers and funders to take that forward, and there's 2.5 million square feet of potential development there over the coming years, so there's going to be lots to go at. We think that clearly public money is going to be important in terms of enabling some of these developments to go forward, and certainly in terms of creating the catalyst for the commercial development to come in. And there's always a limit on the resource that we have available. We work very closely with our partners at the Combined Authority in terms of SIF funding, and we're very confident that the more we deliver, the more government will invest in our city region. And that is the key, as far as I'm concerned, is developing that credibility for delivery, and not just delivering projects, but delivering the outcomes in terms of GVA, in terms of jobs growth, etc., and demonstrating that we are a very investable proposition for government, and they're not investing here because we have problems and everything's terrible, but they're investing here because we're giving them a really good return on that investment. If we can create that, and that requires real collaboration between public and private sectors, with the Combined Authority working closely with the local authorities, then I think we can create the conditions to really move things forward at pace. And I guess the other side of that as well is, if you look at the headroom for investment growth, take the commercial office market, compare Liverpool, where 12 months ago we had headline rents of £20 a square foot. We're now about £24, £24.50 a square foot in the city. You compare that with Manchester, Leeds and other cities, and if we get the conditions right, and I think we will, then I think there is headroom for significant investment growth going forwards as well, that perhaps other cities that are in a bit more mature investment market won't have over this period.
Right.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks, Anne, for your question as well.
Yeah.
So I'll bring in Sean now then. Sean Keys from Sutcliffe. Hello, Sean.
Good morning, from Sutcliffe's head office in Harrington Street, Liverpool. We've been very fortunate in successfully trading during these strange days, albeit at a slightly lower rate. Many construction companies have successfully worked through COVID and are ready for the future. The healthy return of the wider economy is imperative to both businesses and employees in the region. In this respect, I found the City Council and the region have been leading from the front. We thank you. My question is, how does the panel believe we should support businesses and employees who've been struggling with poor mental health during COVID, and especially as we return to work with normal working patterns?
Very good question. Thank you very much, Sean. Frank, if I can start with you here.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. Hi, Sean. It is hugely important, because I think we focus on the economics, we focus on the response elements to it, but individual mental health is going to take a very severe knock as a consequence of COVID. People haven't been able to live normal lives. Once you're taken away from normality, it generates challenges for you. So I think it's an important point to deal with, Sean. It goes back as well to the point that Tony made earlier on about the engagement that we have as the Combined Authority, and Tony and others have as individual local authorities, with the trade unions, with the staff. You need to have an understanding and an empathy. So that's why you won't be seeing dictates that say, we want everyone back in on a certain date, because there are a lot of people really worried out there, quite fearful, and with valid reasons for being fearful. So we've got to contemplate how we deal with that. I think it has been a significant issue that has been well handled across the city region over the course of the last 4 or 5 months. And I think the promotion at an individual organisation level, supported by a city region and a city and a local authority response to that, has to be there, and it has to be appropriate and proportionate to the challenge that we face. And there needs to be some significant understanding of it, because it is going to be a huge challenge, and it's going to put very significant pressure on the health providers on top of the COVID impacts themselves. The mental health issues are going to be very challenging. So as an organisation, it's strictly speaking not something that falls under the Combined Authorities remit. It's more something for the local authorities and the social care side of things. But your point's entirely valid. It is going to be a huge challenge for all of us. And I think the more collaborative and supportive we can be to each other, the better able we'll be able to deal with it as a city region.
I'm going to bring in Tony now, and Tony does touch on the point you made earlier on about your own staff going back into work, but the mental health piece is terrifically important, isn't it, as the economy starts to go back towards something like normal?
Yeah, it is, and it's a great question, Sean, and thank you very much for asking it. And I think you have to look at this from a number of lenses. I'll be very brief on this, but to think about the frontline health and care workers who, quite frankly, there's going to be people there exhibiting signs, symptoms like PTSD because of the crisis they've had to deal with and what they've had to encounter. And obviously, as a local authority with social care staff, we've seen that firsthand. I think it's about the people who've been shielding and have been stuck at home and feeling very isolated. It's about the concerns and fears that people have been experiencing working home and then working from home and then moving back into the workplace. Frank has said that on occasion some of the messaging at the national level perhaps hasn't been as consistent as we'd like. What this means, not just for our country, but for every country, is we are going to face a mental health crisis, and we just need to accept that that's the case, and we need to resource that properly, and we need to make sure that we support our families, friends, colleagues, ourselves and each other to get through that period. Certainly from a city level, we have, as part of our city plan, we have a health and social care element of that. And with colleagues this week, we've been reprioritising that to make sure there's an even greater emphasis on mental health support over the next 12 months or so, because that is going to be very much needed. And the evidence when you have a crisis like this suggests that it really starts to kick in about 9 months after the start of the crisis. So we literally have a few months to get absolutely mobilised to deal with this. And if we don't deal with it, we will suffer the consequences, not just individually and in families, but economically and as a society for a long time to come. So we are getting really, really serious about this. We haven't got all the answers, and it's not going to be an easy fix, but it requires everybody to tackle things. And the one thing I would say for the people on this call, and I include myself in this, as leaders, is that we need to encourage all of our colleagues to be really open about these issues, that it is good to talk about this, and it is not a sign of strength to bottle up your problems, because I don't believe anybody has come through this whole period unscathed, and we are encouraging everybody to be really open and encourage this staff to seek help, to support each other, and that can make a really big difference whilst all the other services are being put in place.
Thanks very much indeed. As we are coming towards an end, we obviously had some questions already. I won't be able to take too many more, but I just want to raise a couple of the subjects that people have raised, if that's all right, just as an observation to sort of the kind of topics that people are raising in our chat today. One person has asked, in terms of what councils are doing to unlock the delivery of new homes, which is something that has been mentioned. We also had a question as well earlier on, or an observation about the need to protect investors, of course, in city projects in light of various high-profile things that have happened. And also another question, and this is, I think, is something that Tony, you did raise earlier on, but I think it is important to raise, about speed and the ability to make decisions quickly. This is Gary at BCEGI, actually, who raised this point about the fact that councils need to have the resources in place of their delivery teams to be able to move and make decisions quickly. I think that's something that Frank as well is very aware of at a time like this, when businesses have struggled, have had to make changes very quickly. It's very important that they can get decisions from the public sector as quickly as possible. Thanks very much to our panelists. Liz, I want to come to you as well. In light of everything you've heard today locally, what are your final thoughts then on Liverpool, the city region, and what's next for us?
Final word. I do think you've got a very solid game plan, and that comes across very clearly. What's really pleasing to hear and reassuring is how aligned the visions are and how you have been communicating so closely. I personally think the whole life sciences piece is a very strong calling card for Liverpool going forward. I didn't mention when I was speaking about ESG and the whole green piece. That's going to be critical. I mean, it's something we've been writing about an awful lot in the magazine. And is another one of these trends that's been, I think the hope is that it's been accelerated, like so many trends, by the COVID crisis, and that it will really underpin a lot of the recovery that's going on. So I've been very impressed by how detailed the visions are. I think they're quite practical as well and achievable. So yeah, you've set yourself your SMART targets very effectively. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. As we have heard some interesting things today, we've heard some ambitious things, so I'm sure we will all watch closely at how these things develop. That is all from me. I'm going to hand over, if I may, then to Stephen, who is going to wrap up our webinar today. Stephen.
Thank you very much, Alistair. I'll be lightning quick because I'm conscious of the time, but I think definitely, you know, out of adversity comes opportunity, and it's good to see the bold, decisive action that's being taken and the ambition that sits within both of the recovery plans. You know, picking up on a couple of the things that were mentioned around sustainability, which is obviously key, but playing to the cultural strengths of the city and the wider city region is vitally important for us. And again, just referring back to what Tony said, talking about time to reimagine the city centre and whether that should be a longer term aim, then certainly I'm very much in favour of that. You know, we've been European capital of culture, so why shouldn't we adopt a European cafe culture permanently going forward? So yeah, great to see. Totally agree with Liz in terms of that solid game plan. And it's now time to just move forward and act. And I think definitely what we've brought together is, you know, public-private sector collaboration and more of that going forward. And that's absolutely key to what we're about from a MIPIM perspective. So we'll be continuing our series of webinars. The next one up is on the 5th of August, where we'll be looking at the Northern approach, where Tony will be joined by leaders from both Leeds and Manchester City Councils, with also some private sector representation on that one. So looking at the wider northern recovery. So it just finally for me to thank each of the panelists for the input. Alistair, for you for the excellent moderation, for our questionnaires who came onto screen. And particularly have to thank Stefan for the wonderful work that he did to ensure the technology worked in that context. So it'll be great to see you all physically soon at some point, and hopefully we will see more of each other back in the city, visiting some of the bars and restaurants and getting some money back into the economy. So thanks everybody, and see you all soon.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
Thank you.